Thank you, Lorna. It's really nice to be part of today and to have listened to all the talks so far. Okay. So maybe a talk like this might help us answer the question as to why progress isn't as fast as we might like it to be, although obviously we have made a lot of good progress. So I want to outline how pushback from the meat industry is basically serving to thwart transformational institutional change towards plant-based diets. And I want to particularly focus on the example of the Dublin Declaration. Who's heard of the Dublin Declaration? Okay, a few hands. Okay, you're going to hear all about it. And so briefly at the end, literally just one slide at the end, what would an alternative to that declaration look like potentially, given the sorts of knowledge that we have? So I'm referring to a couple of publications. This book was mentioned earlier by Melanie, so this is a book that's coming out in November, which I'm co-editor of with Gwen Honeycutt and Kenneth Mentor. It's got quite a criminological focus, but not entirely. It's called Violence and Harm in the Animal-Industrial Complex, Human-Animal Entanglements, and that's my chapter in that. But in addition to that, I've also got this co-authored article which is more or less accepted in the journal Environmental Science and Policy. So I'll be referring to bits and pieces from both of those bits of work in this talk. Okay, and I'm giving some thanks to my co-authors on that second paper as well. Okay, a little bit of background context first, which might sort of position why I'm interested in those scientists who essentially provide the backup for animal agriculture. Right back in 2005, near the start of my academic career, I interviewed a cross-section of UK animal scientists. Animal scientists is a more catch-all term. It includes meat scientists, it includes other sorts of animal scientists as well, like animal welfare scientists. Some quite famous places, the Roslin Institute and the Scottish Agricultural College. So it's not a homogenous community, but it is dominated by livestock production scientists, aka meat scientists. These are the scientists who want to make animal ag as productive and as profitable as possible, and they do sort of genetic research, and they do research on animal feed and this kind of thing. And I was part of a research centre at that time at Lancaster University, which was all about looking at the ethical and social dimensions of genomics. And so I was interested in how meat scientists saw this new knowledge of sequencing the genome of animals that are farmed, and how that genomic knowledge could be used to increase production and profitability. So that was some research I did, which appeared in my first book, Animals as Biotechnology, came out in 2010. And since then, I've done quite a lot of work into helping to theorize the concept of the animal-industrial complex, which is often now used by sociologists and criminologists to understand the institutionalized character of animal exploitation. And yeah, as I mentioned, that book on the previous slide, that volume is doing a lot more work on that as well. And in my, another book, my most recent book came out earlier in this year in March, The Climate Crisis and Other Animals. I actually spent a lot of time in the second half of that book further theorizing the animal-industrial complex as well. So understanding attempts at pushback and what we can call protectionism helps us to better understand how the animal-industrial complex operates to secure business as usual and to prevent the kind of transformational dietary but also philosophical change that we're interested in. Okay. This is probably too small to read. This is my sort of diagram of the animal-industrial complex, at least as it pertains to animal ag, that I've got in my most recent book, the Climate Crisis one. And I mean, I just put it up there because it's kind of useful to think about the sort of work that meat scientists are doing now, which I think sort of comes under the lobbying kind of category, which I've got in the corporations and associations bubble, and how that overlaps with the research and development, and also how government at the top, how government also participates in this lobbying endeavour as well. Some of you might be aware that the government, via the AHDB, has been putting a lot of effort into promoting meat consumption recently. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, then that's in the book. Okay, so why are we seeing pushback from meat scientists now? Well, partly I think it reflects a measure of success from ourselves. Plant-based diets have achieved a certain cultural presence. The profits and jobs of the animal industrial complex, therefore, are under threat to an extent. More philosophically, anthropocentric ideology is under threat. I mean, it has to be, given things like the climate crisis. So this idea of human supremacism and human-animal difference, human-animal separation is being eroded. And nutrition and that's going to come up quite a lot today in my talk, is inherently political because it has consequence for how we understand what it means to be human as well. So we can view the area of nutrition science as a kind of struggle over what it means to be human. And the scientific evidence base for plant-based diets has expanded, and we've already heard that there are broad co-benefits for sustainability and human health when it comes to plant-based diets. And one of the things that I do in my most recent book is to kind of produce these tables of research articles which provide a kind of strong evidence for that scientific evidence base. So again, this will be too small to read, but these are essentially tables in chapter 4 of my book, which, for example, just to read the blue bit at the bottom first, 100 peer-reviewed articles or reports recommending reductions in animal consumption for climate mitigation and other co-benefits. 50 of those are from top science peer-reviewed articles. Another 50 of those are kind of reports, government reports, and that kind of thing, NGOs as well. And then in the red text, 21 studies demonstrating that a plant-based diet can be the lowest emissions diet. Again, the time range there is between 2009 and 2023. I couldn't find any studies that argued that a meat-based diet can be the lowest emissions diet. So that's interesting. So these are just tables that I've accumulated and presented in a chapter in my book, because I think it's a useful sort of evidence base for NGOs to use, for example. Okay, so to the Dublin Declaration, what exactly is it? So back in October 2022, a group of animal scientists got together in Dublin, held a conference, and produced this declaration, which now has over 1,000 signatories, and you can see these signatories on their website. This is the website here. It's all about, as it says here, the Dublin Declaration of Scientists on the Societal Role of Livestock. Okay, interesting that they used that language. And they also had a special issue of the journal Animal Frontiers, which came out in April 2023, and that's in the bottom left-hand corner. I'll say more about that in a moment. And they also had a correspondence piece in Nature Food. That's the bit here at the middle bottom. And there's been a broader campaign of lobbying in social media, and they've also been trying to influence the UNFAO. So the framing of this Dublin Declaration is to place the emphasis on meat's societal role, its evolutionary role, its contribution to human health, its environmental impact, which they downplay, adverse effects, no need to cut down to be green, keep eating meat to be healthy, and there's also a kind of representation of vegans and even reducers as ideologists and zealots. Yeah. So the interesting thing about this journal here is that the funding for that journal comes from these animal science and meat science associations, which in turn they take funding from industry as well. Okay, so we'll come back to some of those relationships later with some interesting diagrams. And one thing that we picked out from the short correspondence piece in Nature Food, that we don't think they should have published this, by the way, because we think it wasn't particularly scientific, and Nature should have higher standards of what they choose to publish. It includes this really odd sentence, actually. It's only about a page long, just over a page. They talk about the ethical reality that the animal needs to give its life in favor of the human species. So we kind of read this as quite a kind of mythological rather than scientific statement, and it's something that's like trying to naturalize that view of of the human consumption of other animals. So it's a kind of interesting, you know, it's almost like they kind of let their guard slip when they wrote that. But it's something that should have been picked up upon by the reviewers. It's only a correspondence. It's not like a full article, so maybe the journal had lower standards, but still I think you've got to peer review a correspondence. So more on this. Okay, so who were the signatories? Who have been the signatories? It was overwhelmingly made up of the global meat, dairy, egg science community, animal production sciences, geneticists, veterinarians, quite a narrow disciplinary profile, really. These are the community of scientists that, over the years, have enabled the industrialization of animal production. Meat scientists are often indistinguishable from industry. There's a lot of mobility between academia and industry in this area. Research aims are often about maximizing profitability, and anthropocentric social norms are assumed. Within these 1,000+ signatories, I was interested to see, because they're arguing quite strong claims about the health benefits of animal consumption, well, how many of these signatories were actually, say, nutritionists or dietitians? Hardly any is the answer. I found 3, and interestingly, all of these 3 figures have courted controversy in recent years via some of their claims and some of their links to the meat industry. So I won't even go into detail on those, but those are some links that have, featured some of the views and some of the controversies of these 3 particular individuals. Okay. And these are people who are quite active on social media, interestingly, to those doing research on social media. I'll come back to that a bit later. So I've done a little bit further analysis in terms of the signatories and looking at the country locations as well. So this figure, which is from, where have I got this? I've got this in the book chapter. And so country locations of signatories of the Declaration, and you can see here, like, US, Spain, Italy, France, Australia, Brazil. I'm sure you can realize that these are very meaty cultures, right? So, I mean, most cultures are meat cultures, but some meat cultures are more meaty than others. So countries with high meat consumption, exports and wealth overrepresented in the signatories. So we could perhaps read the Declaration as meat cultures protecting their own interests. Okay. And here's figure 2, affiliations by country with more than 10 signatories. And we've added here the particular university or research center that the people are from. So one thing that they've done in creating this declaration is actually given us a lot more insight into where these people are and what they do. So they've made themselves visible, and one definition or one dimension of the animal industrial complex that I've worked with previously is that it has a certain element of secrecy to it. And so this is actually we've just exposed ourselves to the world. So, it's interesting to see the different universities and, again, the countries represented very meaty cultures. Okay. And here are 3 plots. Yeah, just sort of a bit more detail around figure 3, relationship between number of signees and national GDP, so how wealthy is the country. Figure 4, the kind of, the meat consumption levels relationship, and figure 5, relationship between number of signees and national beef exports. And you can sort of see some interesting relationships coming up in at least, all of them, but especially the meat supply one and the GDP. So it's kind of, there's a certain amount of economic and cultural protectionism going on here. Okay, I thank Romain Espinoza, my co-author on the journal article, for producing this amazing diagram of relationships pertaining to the Declaration. So the 6 initials here are perhaps the 6 most key individuals in terms of organizing the Declaration and the conference that went along with it and the special issue. And the links that are made, so you've got the Dublin Summit, the Dublin Declaration itself, the Animal Frontier special issue, the Nature Food Correspondence, and then you can trace all the links between different meat science associations, different industry, some also funding links as well. So probably don't have enough time to completely dwell on that right now, but if you'd want to see that, then just drop me an email. it's very valuable, and we're looking forward to what reaction we get when we publish that, hopefully in the next few months. Another thing that we've looked at is in terms of the special issue that they produced, about 7 articles, and also like a kind of editorial article as well. Like what sort of level of self-citation is going on? And we found what we think is quite a high level of self-citation, and as a rule, I think self-citation calls into sort of question the scientific validity of claims when basically you're just sort of citing your own in-group and you're kind of ignoring sort of counter-evidence, that kind of thing. So we think that that calls into question the quality of what they see as top science. What I don't see as top science at all. Okay. A little bit, perhaps the two main instigators of the declaration are Frederick Leroy and Pierre Ederer, and they're sort of interesting individuals in their own right. So Frederick is very active on his Twitter profile, and he's got all these different websites which are essentially doing the same thing, trying to counteract veganism, very sort of denigrating of veganism on social media. He also has an unpaid role with the United Nations FAO. And he proudly put this graph on his Twitter feed, which shows that he was, for Q1 of 2023, placed second amongst top 5 influencers tweeting about plant-based diets in the global consumer industry. He was second only to Michael Greger. So he was obviously, he was quite happy that he was putting out, I guess, messages of denigration against plant-based diets on Twitter, which I still am calling Twitter. Pierre Ederer, an economist, consultant to agribusiness, involved in these various networks, World Farmers Organization, founded the Global Food and Agribusiness Network. So not an economist, you can't really say that he's not really an animal scientist, he's certainly not a nutritionist, but he's certainly interested in promoting the interests of animal agribusiness, and has an interesting profile on the debunking website dsmog.com, who point out that he has worked with Brazil-based JBS, the world's largest meat processor, and presented at industry events and panels alongside representatives from the company. He's also downplayed animal ag's role in climate change. So. Okay, doing for time. Okay, so there's a broader context of backlash and lobbying. So animal source food corporations in countries with large exports have lobbied both the FAO and IPCC. That's been documented. Frederick Leroy, as mentioned, he's also played a significant role in the 2019 online campaign against the Eat Lancet recommendations, which, as you recall, was a plant-rich diet, not a totally vegan diet. And he was one of the first people to employ the hashtag on Twitter, hashtag #YesToMeat, and which then took off as a kind of counter-campaign to the Eat Lancet recommendations. So as I mentioned, Leroy also has a role with the FAO. In 2013, FAO LEAP, which is its public-private partnership, was chaired by Frank Mitloehner, a signatory of the Dublin Declaration. He's become quite infamous as a kind of very public and visible advocate in the States of ASF consumption. And there's a really good article from this year where he was the subject of a critical peer review and looking at all his activities and relationships. And that's by Morris and Jacket. That's this paper here, The Animal Agriculture Industry, US Universities, and the Obstruction of Climate Understanding and Policy. So I recommend that article to you all. And we also know in 2023, the FAO were exposed as having played down the role of animal source foods in the climate crisis since the publication of its own livestock long shadow way back in 2006. So since then, it's been a steady backtracking trajectory in terms of what the FAO have done. Also, a UK signatory has also been trying to influence UK nutrition and dietary bodies such as the British Nutrition Foundation and the British Dietetic Association. So if you want to know more about that, just contact me. Okay. So almost finished, I think, couple more slides maybe. So it's important to expose the ideological and profit-driven corruption of science taking place here. I don't think anthropocentrism is a sustainable or scientific ideology, and this is what they're trying to maintain. And science for profit rather than health and sustainability should not be seen as trustworthy. There's some other important points to make in terms of how we think, what we think about scientific knowledge. This is not the same as saying that's not the same as saying scientific knowledge generally is not provisional and contestable. It certainly is. I would personally resist the notion that better science is somehow separate from ideology and normative ideas. Sometimes evidence just reinforces certain worldviews, even though it should not be cherry-picked to suit a worldview. So, you know, it's a complex picture. Ethical arguments are also evidence-based, which is something that I think a lot of scientists don't want to admit, but animal consciousness, animal sentience, human-animal similarity, there's a scientific evidence base for these things as well. So I would say that obviously we need to affirm the scientific consensus that has emerged around plant-based diets and ecological public health, the co-benefits, and share that knowledge with the institutions we are trying to change. These sorts of databases that I've produced, but obviously others have done similar things too. Okay, so if we were going to come up with an alternative to the Dublin Declaration, perhaps say a few things here today in Manchester, well, we'd perhaps say a few statements like the following. So I think these are all quite robust things to say. Plant-based diets strongly support policies for ecological public health. It's basically the co-benefits argument. There is vast untapped potential to improve the health and flourishing of human populations through diverse kinds of whole food plant-based diets. It's what we heard earlier about the economic benefits, for example, as well as the health benefits. A plant-based food system can have the lowest greenhouse gas emissions, improved even further when we combine with policies for localization and against food waste. So yeah, I don't think we even realize what could be done there yet. A plant-based food system also has the best profile for wildlife and biodiversity recovery. Vegan values and practices properly respect the consciousness and sentience of other animals. Remember, that's evidence-based as well. And vegan values can also help create more peaceful and less violent societies, also implied by what Cameron was saying earlier as well. Okay, I'll stop now. Thank you.
Richard. Questions? Jack?
Thank you. First of all, I'd say I definitely signed the declaration, so if you want to start writing it together, we can. And also, thank you for writing your book, because I read it on a long flight to LA, and it kept me very entertained. But my question is...
You said it didn't depress you.
Yeah. You said at the end, pushing back against, and you've done a really excellent job doing that here with this audience. But then I begin to think, okay, how do we reach out to other audiences that are less scientifically literate or less interested in kind of scientific discourses? How do we kind of make this more accessible for people who might just pick up fragments of the argument on social media and then just take it as fact? We need to kind of get to those people as well. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it seems like culturally, trust in science isn't particularly high at the moment. So there's probably work to be done around that generally. But not obviously blanket trust. We've got issues with critical thinking, haven't we? So part of critical thinking skills should be to think critically about scientific knowledge and different scientific claims that are being made. So the danger is that people who don't have that critical understanding of scientific knowledge production will hear something like the Dublin Declaration and think, oh, fine, all this stuff about changing my diet is wrong, and business as usual and the status quo is absolutely fine. And they will think, well, look at these scientists. They're secret vegans and they have an agenda. But the interesting thing is, like those lists of articles, they're not necessarily arguing for veganism, but they're at least arguing for reductions in animal source food consumption that's mainstream science from, Science, Nature, all the big journals and stuff. And so there's something quite compelling there. And probably there's a kind of incumbency bias where the status quo social norm means that people don't want to even think about recommending anything stronger than that, even though it would have potentially better environmental results and probably better health results as well. So I don't know if I have an answer to your question other than the kind of pressing need to improve scientific literacy, but also improve kind of critical thinking around scientific knowledge production. So yeah, it's a difficult question. Can't really answer it perfectly, sorry. Yeah.
John?
Thanks, Ted. Hi, Richard. Super interesting. Yeah, the Dublin Declaration stuff is kind of hilarious. It's like so there. That what you said about them kind of revealing themselves inadvertently, I think, is spot on. I was wondering, so you characterize it as a response to some extent, the success that this movement has had in putting pressure on the existing system. And in that sense, it's like utterly unsurprising, right, that the existing system is trying to defend itself, to continue to reproduce itself. It would like to maintain the status quo. It's highly probable that given the types and degree of pressure on it, it won't be able to completely maintain the status quo unchanged, right? It will have to adapt in some way, but adaptation within bounds that it can tolerate. So I was wondering if you have a view on what you think that the extent or degree of adaptation might be. Like all the discourses of regenerative agriculture, like one clear kind of obvious example of an attempt to do that, to tweak what they're doing in a certain way to maintain the kind of core aspect. But it's not that the exact same system of 10, 15, 20 years ago is going to be maintained. It's going to be the kind of core institutions, but with potentially slightly altered practices. Do you have a view of, does the Dublin Declaration tell us about what those kind of changes within the system, adaptive changes, might actually look like? If there are going to be any, maybe you don't think there will be any.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like there's a question lurking behind your question, like where does power lie in society, and does this community of scientists have the power to maintain the status quo anyway, and perhaps people's everyday decisions and their daily practices will prevail. But I suppose it could be, it could be some kind of hybrid reality, I suppose, to answer your question. It might be that bizarre blended burger that we saw with half corn, half meat, which is kind of speaks to a very cold efficiency understanding of sustainability, but has nothing to say about an idea of sustainability, which is about values and thinking about the value of non-human animals. Yeah, I don't know. I suppose some various scenarios where there's some kind of concessions made where, I feel that the changes are kind of bypassing them anyway, in terms of how infrastructure is gradually improving. And I think there are reasons to believe that they don't have the power that they think they have, and that change is going to happen anyway. But then I'm reminded how powerful capitalism is, and then so yeah, I don't really know, but some kind of, I think to directly answer your question, some kind of hybrid concessionary kind of reality would be maybe the best that they can hope for, actually.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Richard.
Cheers.